So, just a quick disclaimer.
Are we live?
We are live, and I just want to remind you, in honor of Veterans and Remembrance Day, we have all but the utmost respect to every
Oh, there.
veteran that gave their lives. And no matter what we say tonight, no matter what jokes we make or crude commentary we make, we just want to remind you that this is all in good fun. It's nothing about the events that took place. Our criticism is constructed around the films themselves and their depictions of war, not necessarily in the subject matter itself. So try to remain civil in the comments if you can, and if we do make any crude jokes, just a reminder that this is all in good fun. We mean no disrespect whatsoever, so just
Yes.
content warning. And also,
Also,
we are talking about
apologies
some
because
pretty heavy subject matter, so do keep that in
definitely.
mind.
Apologies for saying, "Are we live?" during the middle of that. My
No,
audio was
that's
it was a
that's
little
all
bit
right. No,
delayed.
it's good to be sure, and I do have
Yeah.
an intro planned. I was wondering if you gentlemen would join me in the minute of silence,
Yes.
starting now.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes.
Welcome to Tuesdays of Moire, everybody. On
Yeah.
our
I'm
first.
glad we got that out of the way because we're also going to be talking about Puppet Master, the Littlest Reich tonight. So
Yeah,
just to get this right out of the
bit of a
gate.
tonal change, but to start with, this is Tuesdays of Moire, and this is our World War II episode, the first episode in
Yes.
honor of Veterans Day or Remembrance Day in Canada. I'm your host, Ian Taylor. Joining me tonight is my wonderful co-host, Devin King, and our wonderful co-co-host, Stephen Beeson. How are you guys doing tonight?
Howdy, I'm doing well. This is actually this is a good episode for me to be a part of. My grandfather was actually a merchant marine in World War II, so it's neat to see films that, well, at least two of these films that touch upon this kind of subject matter and really explore what was going through some of those guys' heads and the situation.
Mhm.
It's pretty neat.
My great grandfather was a pilot, actually. More
Oh, really? Okay.
specifically, he was a pilot in the Battle of Britain, and he
Oh,
survived.
wow.
Unfortunately, though, not too long after he came home, he suffered tragically the cancer, but he
Ah,
still served proudly in the war and somehow managed to survive when, unfortunately, so many people didn't.
Mm.
yeah.
My great uncle, who I never met, he was my grandpa's older brother. He served in the war, I believe, as a sergeant, and I think he died on one of the ships that ended up on the beach of Normandy, much like the beginning of Saving Private Ryan.
Wow.
Wow.
That's
Has.
incredible.
No, I can only imagine his reaction is if he's seen Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
Apparently, the reactions to Saving Private Ryan were so extreme for a lot of veterans that they made a helpline for PTSD specifically for the movie, and they received 14,000 calls in the first 2 days of the movie's runtime in theaters. 14,000.
I also, yeah, I also thought it was interesting. I saw a real Navy SEAL interviewed on the Joe Rogan podcast. And he said that his grandfather was in the Pacific Theater and went to go see Saving Private Ryan and reported he had to leave the theater because it was like he could smell diesel that many years later.
Really
Wow.
shows the effect that cinema can have on people, even after all these years.
Definitely.
Speaking of which, the first film we're talking about tonight is Saving Private Ryan, directed by Steven Spielberg and is often hailed as his magnum opus. Which one of you gentlemen would like to introduce this movie? Because I personally wouldn't mind introducing the Thin Red Line, which is shocking to a lot of people because I like this Spielberg snob a lot on this channel, but Thin Red Line is a bit more... Yeah.
I'll introduce the third one because
all right. Devin?
I'll let Devin.
All right.
Yeah.
So, Saving Private Ryan, I don't think it needs much of an introduction. It's probably one of the most ubiquitously known, famous World War II films because of its depiction of warfare being so unflinching, at least to our American palates of cinema. And that was one of the main goals I think Steven had going in, was to try to create an unflinching portrayal of war. Although that doesn't necessarily make it an anti-war film. In fact, quite contrary to popular belief, it is still quite a pro-war effort. Steven posted a video earlier talking about this and how the film ultimately is saying that war is hell, but it was worth it for the freedom that we gained. And I think that is the sentiment that is mostly viewed in America, having won the war, even though it's a way of coping with the loss, that it was all worth it. Although maybe these days we question this notion a little bit and kind of go back and forth between these two viewpoints. This might be a cultural kind of point of view between American and Canada and other allied powers, perhaps. And that was kind of what I wanted to... Like last year when we did this pro-war, or when we did this war film series, I really wanted to look outside of our normal kind of vantage points, and that's where we looked at films that looked at different perspectives. Like last year with World War II films, we looked at war taking place in Belarus, that's Come and See, and then we looked at Grave of the Fireflies, which is Japanese. The third one escapes me at the moment, but we looked at Jojo Rabbit. We looked at so we looked at films that kind of took it, that kind of looked at it from different vantage points. But and that's what Saving Private Ryan is, because I do think it does represent our main cultural perspective of World War II. That it was hellish and it was brutal, but ultimately it was worth it for the freedoms we gained. Or was it? That's the question I think we want to ask tonight is war, what is it good for?
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Nice segue there.
Yes, bravo.
Bravo. Yeah, I mean, I'll just go ahead and start out. This film is, in my eyes, a masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
I do not know much, probably as much as I would like to, about Spielberg's filmography. I feel like as a whole, he's one of those directors that I've yet to really explore. And I also think that it's interesting because, you look at something like this and then you look at his recent work and it's almost like what happened, It's
like the passion
Ready
just
Player
isn't there.
One and yeah. But I mean, to me, this may be the best film that we're gonna talk about tonight. I think that from the first 10 minutes, where they're recreating the Battle of Normandy in the Omaha Beach, there's something about that opening sequence that is so brutal and haunting in what it's portraying. And I think the thing that I notice about it is there's a lot of war films and a lot of battlefield sequences in movies today that are more about the spectacle. They're more about the sort of, here's the guys running with the guns and they look cool. It's like, whatever. But this film, it's more about, I think, how do I word this? The use of slow-mo and the use of shaky cam and this sort of really boots on the ground, no pun intended, approach to the cinematography is so incredible because it puts you right there and you feel, obviously you're not in the theater. I mean, you're not in the battle, but it feels like you're there. And it's another thing that the battle happens so quickly. That was one thing that I noticed, is there's so many consequences that if you blink at any moment, somebody could just be gone.
Yeah,
and I feel like
really does cement that. And I know Spielberg's films have a tendency for being like really cheesy and really schmaltzy, and I'm really glad that he really restrained that approach here. One of the big things I noticed in the action scenes that add so much to them is there's absolutely no music whatsoever, which is so uncommon for Spielberg. That
was another thing I noticed. I think John Williams did some music for this film.
He did all the music, but there isn't that much music in it compared to Spielberg's other work.
Well, there is one sequence where there's what is it? The record player.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, and they're getting them to translate it.
As a whole, the movie is mostly quiet, and I think, as you said, that really works to its advantage.
It just makes the action feel so much more visceral, and on top of that, they recorded real gunfire and real sounds of old explosions. That really just help you put yourself into that environment. We see so many movies that try to capture that vibe, that visceral, handheld, shaky cam vibe to make it more realistic, but so many films that try to approach compared to this feel like they're just trying too hard. Like you notice it and it just pulls you out of the experience. But here it just feels completely organic, and I think a big reason for that too is Spielberg did no storyboarding whatsoever. So a lot of it was improvised. A lot of it was, well, what if we go over here and shoot it this way, and what if we have this actor go over here and do that? And I think that improvisational nature really sells the believability of the camera work and the style.
Well,
I think so, because I think... Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say briefly, it's almost as if the camera is a character in itself.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Devin.
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying, is that I think having just kind of going with your instincts of where to place the camera and following the action, it is like you're improvising, like you just landed on the beach. And that adds to that level of immersion when the camera feels like a soldier kind of omnipresently kind of following the action, but they're part of they're part of it. And what's interesting about Spielberg that you'll notice, and this is something that's ubiquitous in his film work, is he does a lot of short, long takes. They're not these long takes that you necessarily notice. They're just economically placed in to capture a few different, what would be traditionally a few different shots and coverage in one fluid motion. And it adds to this forward momentum of the storytelling. And I think that's what also helps make all this chaotic and confusion prevent it from being disorienting necessarily, because within a few shots you see the camera float from a wide to a close-up to a medium in one kind of fluid motion as they're following action of a few different characters, and you see that all over this opening sequence. I mean, this opening sequence is film school in a nutshell of how you economically tell a story but also keep it immersive. And yeah, there's just so much that was put into that opening scene to really create the momentum of the rest of the film.
Well, and I think Spielberg was actually inspired by Robert Capa, who was a war photographer.
That's right.
Who was actually there on the beach. And allegedly he took 106 photos. Now, some people dispute this, but the story is that he took 106 and only 11 survived a processing
wow.
fire. Yeah.
Because there was just so much chaos going on.
And so there was 11 photos that are now called the Magnificent 11. And if you actually look at those photographs, they're very blurry. They're very sort of in the moment. And whether or not this was because, they were just 11 out of however many were taken, or, whether this was, just because he was constantly ducking as he was taking the photographs, or some combination of both, it really shows just the chaos of that moment. And I think that that's something that Spielberg managed to capture in a moving medium, a moving image, just, beautifully.
Yes, and everybody says like this film is only memorable for its D-Day sequence. It's kind of the Full Metal Jacket issue where, only the drill sergeant sequences are the only memorable parts of the movie, but I think they're really doing a disservice to the rest of the film because as a whole, it's just this haunting, gritty, beautiful experience. Like, the film is 3 hours long, nearly 3 hours long, and it doesn't even remotely feel that length throughout the entire running time. Like, I was watching it again, I'm like, this has to be a director's cut. Like, there's no way this is nearly 3 hours long, and sure enough, it's just the theatrical cut.
Yeah. Well, I personally haven't seen that criticism, but holy shit.
Well, not
that's
really
so
criticism,
wrong.
but just more so people going like, it's a good film, but that D-Day sequence though, and it's like it's a great sequence, but
well, and to me, one of the the best sequences of the entire film, even more, well, not even more, but almost on par with the D-Day sequence, is when Tom Hanks is shooting a single pistol at this tank.
Yes.
And it's like, holy shit, and you feel
like the
desperation and that, last stand.
There's a desperation, but there's also just look in his eyes, and he knows it's like this isn't gonna happen. Like, this isn't gonna work out.
And again,
the utter helplessness,
exactly.
and then a sudden rise of hope when, a plane shoots it down.
And again, this is without music. This is just a
visual
emotion.
Storytelling.
Yeah, it's the storytelling, 100%.
And this is what really affected me when I first saw this film when I was a kid, maybe like 8 or 9 years old. Like, I was really young, and it felt like I was watching something I shouldn't see, kind of thing. Like, it really felt like I was there and I was seeing back in time to this thing. And it was such an interesting time to experience this thing because around the time I think Call of Duty 2 was out, or I remember playing it as well, and just noticing not only the differences in the medium between a video game and a film, but how they depict these things. Like, there's this, like, they're both pro-war in a sense, but the Saving Private Ryan does a good job at unglamorizing it and showing this and showing just the real nature of it. And I thought that was very important for me to understand when I was, hearing about all these stories on Remembrance Day or Veterans Day in the U.S., and also hearing about what my great-grandfather experienced. I feel like if I hadn't seen this film, I may not have been able to connect with just hearing the story, because I almost need to see it to really believe it. And luckily, our generation has not been drafted into a mass world war, and hopefully through like the depiction of these films, we can kind of learn to not do that. Or at least come to an understanding of what all of its implications are and what all of its hardships infer. And I hadn't felt that way again until I saw Come and See last year. Like, both of those films had such an impact at a different age of me understanding of what war means, because we're lucky enough that we haven't experienced this kind of thing. But this, I think, helped appreciate what it all means and how terrible it is.
But the filmmaking is fantastic, but what really draws this film together is like the characters. Like, they're so
100%.
iconic. They play off each other really well and have like different. I always enjoy a good story where the characters have different ways to add to like the main theme of the story. and centered around like either or not this Ryan deserves to be saved, deserves to be found, and the whole time just thinking, why couldn't the Martian have this fight? Why didn't more people in that be like,
Right.
why are we putting in all these resources to save one guy? And this movie does that, and ironically, both movies involve saving Matt Damon, but it's
I
that
think
it,
someone,
it's the fact that
yeah.
you kind of agree with both sides of the discussion. There's no real like there's no Willem Dafoe character where you're just against them the entire time. You completely understand like the motivations of the characters, even when they do some very questionable things that probably a lot of veterans were put through.
Well, I also thought it was interesting because I think Time magazine, one of these news outlets, did a story where someone put together the combined cost of like The Martian and Saving Private Ryan and like what was it, like Syriana, a
Nine
couple of other
billion
ones.
dollars.
It was like $900 billion that the United
Most
States
of
has
that's
spent.
from The Martian, I guarantee it.
Well, yeah, trying to get Matt
Wow.
Damon home. Uh,
Yeah, about
Well,
3 movies where we have to get Matt Damon home. It's just gotta
what
save
could
that
Matt
cute
Damon
face.
get lost? I mean, I think he just has no sense of direction. I think he needs.
and maybe that's
Yeah.
it.
I think he needs more help upstairs.
Yeah,
trying
no,
to-
he's
trying to
he's gonna
navigate.
get lost on his way to see his girlfriend in Good Will Hunting.
Oh
I
man.
mean, I think this is why he never ends up on Jimmy Kimmel's because he can't find his way to the damn building. You know?
Oh, there you go.
He needs
Yeah.
a GPS.
Well, that explains the Good Will Hunting sequel that they did in that Kevin Smith movie, where it's like, what was that?
Finding
Good Will
Forrester?
Hunting. I can't remember it, but it was something like Will's Pissed or
Oh
something.
yeah,
like
Will's
Hunting
pissed
Season.
in the
Yeah.
Kevin Smith movie. Haven't really
Yeah.
watched much from Kevin Smith, but we also have
Yeah.
we have Matt Damon, we have Vin Diesel protecting family and doing everything he
Yes,
can
and
to save
this is my
family.
headcanon, but this is actually Vin Diesel from Fast and the Furious. Like, this is his grandfather. So it's like the family cinematic universe.
Oh, well.
No.
No, it makes sense, man. It makes sense when you think about
No,
it. There's a theory out there.
no, but I mean, jokes aside, I mean, the performances here are rock solid.
Y-
Everybody is giving their absolute best. Tom Hanks is like I've never seen him. I mean, he is an absolute badass in this.
But he's
And I
also
think
like he kind of starts off as stoic and emotionless because he's just driven himself to the point where he can't really connect with anybody because he'll just have to deal with the
Yeah.
fact that he's lost people. And
It's
throughout the
a
experience,
survival thing.
yeah, and throughout the experience he's kind of reconnecting with his humanity on this mission, and it's never comes
Yeah.
across as cheesy or preachy, and it's very organic to the story and the character's beliefs, and he sells that so
Yeah,
well.
I think the scene that really got me is well, there's a couple morally questionable characters in this. They're not on screen very long, but it's like whenever the soldiers shot down people who had their arms up and were surrendering, essentially. Like
And
that's
saying they weren't Germans. Like that's what that
and,
translates to, is that they aren't Germans, they're Czech
and
soldiers.
They were
saying
Czech, yeah.
Yeah.
they were Czech soldiers, and then the one guy who kept begging for his life, and everyone's standing around giving him like the death stare, and it's those scenes where, and I think Tom Hanks kind of stood up to stop them from being overly brutal. But it's like those are the scenes that really I think humanize and really grounded and kind of take the moral. They go a little into the realm of moral ambiguity. The rest of this film doesn't quite. It's a little more straightforward. Although it does make me wonder what kind of film this would be if they put all this time and effort to saving Ryan when he like just disappeared or vanished or died, or and what if they didn't win that battle at the end? Like, it wouldn't have such a triumphant thing. It would ring a lot more shallow. But I think it could have had, because anything could have happened really in the last scene. It's just that they happened to be there, and it happened to be one of the most important battles in the war, and that I think was real. But what if it wasn't? And that's where I think this film could have been a very, very different kind of thing, and could have asked some very, very different kind of questions. Where
That's true.
anti-war films really lean into the pointlessness of it, where this film says war is hell and it is nothing to glorify, but it is worth it for freedom. But an anti-war film, like a different director might take that a different direction. Like saying, "What if this is just a big mess that we're all caught in?"
Mm-hmm.
Well, and actually, I mean, this is interesting you bring it up because this was one of the criticisms that was leveled against it years after the fact. In fact, Oliver Stone accused the film of promoting war and placed it alongside films such as Black Hawk Down and Gladiator that he believes were well made. And yeah, I don't know what he was going for
That's
there.
Rome. That's a completely different period in time.
Yeah, Oliver Stone says that he believes they were well made, but may have inadvertently contributed to the American readiness for the invasion of Iraq.
Gladiator.
Yeah. Also, coming from an opposing opinion, Brian De Palma commented that the level of violence in something like Saving Private Ryan makes sense because Spielberg is trying to show something about the brutality of what happened. So, I mean, that's all on the Wikipedia page. And I just got to say, I mean, I think that, I mean, and I even ran into this reading the reviews on Letterboxd. So there are people who seem to think that this is, perhaps a bad thing, that it is maybe glorifying war in the sense of justifying it. But I think that in the context of World War II, I think it's justified. I mean, if you look at, what was happening during that time, and, you think about what people were going through, what, men and women and children. I mean, these are Nazis, right? These are literal, some of the most evil, regimes in history. And so I think that this film earns the right to tell a story that is good in nature, and it portrays these characters as heroes because that's what they are. And to me, I think that really resonated. I mean, I had a, I mean, I can't speak for Oliver Stone, but I think he's wrong.
Yeah. Well, so here's my.
I think Oliver Stone did a Vietnam film, and for Vietnam, it was a lot more of a gray area in terms of.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think
that where I think World War II, at least culturally speaking, we looked at a lot more black and white. Like it was us against Nazis, where Vietnam, it's we went to the jungle and we kind of messed things up and then pulled out, and then we're trying to process what that meant and if that was a good idea.
I think that a narrative like what he's talking about would work in context of Vietnam. It would work in context of probably the Afghanistan war, But
yeah,
as far as World War II, I think that this film definitely earns the right to just maybe be a little bit feel good by the end of it.
I wouldn't even say feel good. It's a very tragic ending. I would say it's even bittersweet.
Well,
bittersweet,
sure.
Right.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's definitely bittersweet, but I mean, the characters are played as heroes, and I think that to try and do this maybe in such a way, like if you were to do this in terms of like Full Metal Jacket or something, where one of the guys was just a little bit off, I think that would have taken away from the impact.
Here's the way I look at it is, I think any film where I watch it and just think to myself, I would never want to be on these battlefield with these men. I would never want to share these events or make these decisions or do anything along those lines. I don't think I could ever call films of that impact on me a pro-war movie, regardless of what it says about, potential messages about being on the side of the war or being on the side with the Americans. If I watch a movie and get the impression that, I'm enveloping myself in this atmosphere, and that atmosphere is making me feel sick to my stomach, I can never justify calling it a pro-war movie. A lot of people say The Hurt Locker is a pro-war movie, and I disagree. I'd say that's one of the most anti-war movies out there. It's just, it's never explicitly saying it, and because of that, people take it as an a pro-war movie. It all depends on how you look at it.
Here's a question that I would ask you, Ian. So when you watch the film, you know that you wouldn't want to go anywhere near battlefields or engage in this type of mass-scale warfare.
That's right.
But would anyone else watching the film, like, are there people that would watch Saving Private Ryan and think, yeah, if war is called, I am the first in line and I'm going to defend my country because it's worth it. I'm sure that there's people out there like that.
Well,
I
yeah,
think a
that's
true
what I'm saying
anti-war.
is that it's all about interpretation. You're never going to make everybody
Yeah.
happy when it comes to talking about war films.
Well, and this is what I'm wondering is, to what point is it pro, to what point is it anti? I think a film like Come and See or Johnny Got His Gun, even, or actually especially, I don't think anybody can come away from that thinking, yeah, war is great, or I want to do that. Like, I think those are very true anti-war films in my view.
Come and
I
See,
would
yes.
argue-
Johnny Got His Gun. I think if somebody looked at war in a very certain way, from a I'm not gonna end up like this, schmuck kind of perspective or something along those lines. Like, people will always find excuses to do what they want in life.
I mean, Apocalypse Now is probably the biggest anti-war film.
But and that's the thing. Francis Ford Coppola said it's not an anti-war movie, so it depends on how you look at it.
That is crazy. Wow.
Yeah, he just said it's a war movie. It's not pro-war. It's
Huh.
not anti-war. It's just a war movie. But many people take away as anti-war movie. Some people take it away as look at all those. There are people out there like Jarhead kind of made fun of this point. There are people out there that look at the Call of the Valkyrie scene at the beginning. They're like, "Whoa, this is so cool! This is like a cheer-worthy moment. Look at all those badass helicopters hanging in the war." Like, it all depends on your perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Well, no, I mean, kind of back to, Saving Private Ryan.
Yes.
That there is an incredible sense of direction. There's a clear, poignant vision. I never once felt that, even, and I don't know if this makes sense, but even if I didn't know where the story was going to go, I knew that there was someone behind the camera that knew exactly what they were doing.
That's a good way of putting it.
This is an absolute masterwork, down to the performances. I mean, this film also changed how war movies were made henceforth. I mean, this is the camera techniques and all of the things they were implementing here.
There's so many films that tried to replicate that.
Right, went on to really reinvent the wheel in a sense, and I think that alone is incredible.
Yeah. Have you heard of a film called Passchendaele?
I guess a question. Oh God, I was waiting for you to bring this up.
Awful.
The question I was going to ask: has it changed it for the better or for the worse? I think Passchendaele is a great example of how it's changed for the worse. Although I think you can find another film that can argue about how it's changed for the better. I think it's affected both ways, but I remember watching Passchendaele in school, in class. The only exciting thing was the sex scene because we were all in grade 9 or whatever.
Woo!
And so it's a World War I film, Canadian. I'm pretty sure. Which
there's your problem.
Well, no. Like there's good Canadian films. This is not one of them. But
okay.
All I remember is the sex scene because we were all in grade 9, and that was just like, really exciting at that age. But then the other thing was this overly drawn out and trying hard to be poetic ending, where this guy's dying on in no man's land with a crucifix, if I remember right, and there was doves flying, and it was just trying really hard to be symbolic and important. I don't remember anything else about the film.
Here's the thing. The whole movie sets itself like it's trying to be like a grounded Saving Private Ryan kind of movie, and then that scene happens. It's just it's just not even a Terrence Malick movie. It's just a David Lynch movie all of a sudden. Like, everybody just stops fighting and lets this guy with a cross go out in the middle of the battlefield while doves are flying in the air, and then they just resume. He literally put a pause on the plot and resumed it. But here's the thing. There's always going to be, as influential as movies are, there's always going to be directors that misinterpret it for the sake of a paycheck to try and harpoon on that and try to, make the next great thing while forgetting what the director did and the purpose behind their style in the first place. You know, that's
Well,
always going to be the case.
I will admit I have never heard of Passchendaele.
Good.
Just Googling it, it has 40% on Rotten Tomatoes and is free on Tubi.
Nice.
I mean, Thin Red Line
but-
was also on Tubi.
But has it changed it for the better? Well, I can say that Quentin Tarantino expressed admiration for the film, cited it as influence on Inglourious Bastards, and supposedly Christopher Nolan met with Spielberg in preparation for Dunkirk.
Mhm.
So maybe there is some good to have come out of this. I mean, it's hard to talk about this film because there's very little, if anything, that I didn't like about this film.
Well, there was a couple things, but they're very nitpicky. But
very nitpicky.
There's stuff that I would only like pick on in retrospect. Like this, I didn't rewatch it for this thing just because I'd seen it so many times over the years. Yeah, I'm just.
Well, and
but no,
maybe my
it's
opinion
so
is
fresh in my mind still.
Well, maybe my opinion is coming from recency bias because this is the first time I've seen this film.
oh,
Right.
gotta get on more.
And
movies.
me, I remember watching this as a kid, and it was actually kind of inspiring for me because it made me think, maybe I could do that. Like the whole filmmaking thing. Like I remember seeing behind the scenes of Steven Spielberg in his early films, like when he's like a little kid, and how he would do these like little war films with friends of his, and how they would put like a piece of wood on a rock with sand and bury half of it with sand, and then his friend would be like dressed up as a soldier. He would run and he would step on the other end of that board to make the sand fly up, and he'd fall over like a grenade was just thrown at him. And that was how they did those. That's how he did his little, home movies. And I thought, that sounds like fun. And I kind of wanted to do that with some friends of mine. It never happened, but it gave me that seed of an idea.
Well, that's cool. That's cool. And yeah, like I said, issues are very minor. I personally think the scene where Bryan Cranston goes to let the general know about the missing brothers, and the general gives this really heartfelt, poetic speech, and is crying over. Yeah, I thought that was a little cheesy. I thought that was a little. The exposition was kind of on the nose.
That's where they really take on the thesis of the film and the stance of, of what it is, and they quote that same line like 3 times, or they kind of allude to it 3 times through the film.
Yeah, they reprise it at the end of the movie, but that scene is just like it's on the nose when so much of the rest of the film is much more subtle, and it's just really corny, and it basically exists just to be a shitty exposition dump. I've never been a fan of that scene, and there's a couple of like kind of convenient ex machinas that kind of draw me off the action a little bit. Like the plane scene at the end, like it's a great scene, but I always thought like the plane just happened to come moments before the tank crushed Tom Hanks. Come on. that was a little too convenient, but that's very much a Spielberg trope, is the mega convenient ex machina.
Well, I will kind of agree that my only nitpicks are there are 2 sequences, both in the beginning, like one at the beginning and one at the end, that feel a little bit tonally disconnected from the rest of the film. So the scene where, as you're describing, the Bryan Cranston, he says we have to go save him, and they have
We're
that
gonna
kind of
get
schmaltzy,
this bastard. We're gonna bring him home.
yeah, Abraham Lincoln kind of thing. And then the end where, he salutes the grave, and those sequences, and I don't think they're bad.
Yeah, I think the grave sequence was good. It's just the speech before that was, kind of corny.
Well, yeah.
Reminded me of Interstellar.
I don't think they're bad, but they also, the entire film is more brutal and more graphic.
Visceral,
yeah, visceral. So I think that those kind of sweetsy moments are just a little bit disconnected in some way.
And they feel like the worst parts of Spielberg, when the rest of the film really doesn't feel like that.
Yeah, I agree, yeah.
Besides that,
I do love the transition from a young Matt Damon to the old man, though.
That was seamless.
Definitely.
That's one of the best age transitions I've seen since City of God.
I remember watching that when I was young, and I got really emotional with that. Like it really, I don't know, just something about aging and seeing people change. Just it's just
That's
and
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, the only other thing I don't even know if this is a nitpick, but it was something that I noticed that was
Off.
really interesting. Is there's a sequence, and I want to make sure I understand this, but there's a sequence where the one character is a little bit cowardly,
Mm-hmm.
and he has this
Mhm.
difficulty going up the stairs. One of his brothers in arms has been, you know, killed by this Nazi. There's a very graphic knife fight, and it's such a weird sequence that the Nazi comes down the stairs and sees him and just walks by him.
Mm-hmm.
Did I understand that right?
No, you understood that right. The way I saw it was, this guy, because he's so cowardly, is like, this guy's just a scared kid. I don't want to kill children. I've got better things to do.
Well, and I mean, again, that's not really a nitpick, but that to
It's just
me was
something you
very
noticed.
that was very poetic in a
Mm-hmm.
sense.
It made it a bit
It
more
was,
realistic.
It's the kind
yeah.
of thing that I almost want to see more in war films. Not because that is that I like weak characters like that, just because I feel like that's more honest. I feel like there's more people who, I mean, in the heat of things, can either fight or flight, or just break under pressure, and everything just gets to them, and
Well,
it
and
just shows how
yeah.
how different people can respond to all this, all this stress that they're in, this post-traumatic stress that they're developing,
Well,
in
and
the
it's
midst of the.
not it walks a very thin line, no pun intended. It walks a
Yeah,
very thin
yeah.
line because it does add, not that the German soldier is justified, not that he's a good person, but it adds to his humanity in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a
Yeah.
very thin line to walk there with the nuance of, you don't want to come across and give the idea that he may be doing it out of mercy, or, that he's somehow like a good, you know what I'm saying? I
Yeah,
just think that
they
the
leave it
way
up to
Well,
that they did
interpretation.
that,
I,
yeah, I
I
think
also I also like it when a film shows both sides as people who are both
Mm-hmm.
just kind of put against each other by their governments for their own ends, and
yeah,
that's just the unfortunate reality of it. Is
Yeah,
and I feel like other films have explored that a little bit more, where we want to feel righteous in our efforts because of how grave the consequences have been, but truth is we're just fighting over land, and it's kind of a petty skirmish on a mass scale. Um,
yeah. And on
that's
top of that,
yeah.
there's another great scene like that with the German sniper where you can see like he's like visibly nervous and stressed out and drenched in sweat. Like he isn't like this stern, maniacal, robotic villain. Like he's just like you can see like his humanity going through him, which makes it a lot more terrifying. And let's
Can we
talk about
also
that
talk
scene with
about
the
that
Jeremy Davies for a second. One of the
the
most stressful
sniper with the
scenes I've seen in a movie, where you're just like, come on, Jeremy, go up the stairs, go up the stairs, come on, you
yeah.
can do it. But there was something Siskel said about this movie that really stuck with me, and something a lot of people won't admit is we'd be more like Jeremy Davies than John Wayne. And I think there's so much truth to that, where that scene is only stressful because so many people would feel that way in that situation.
Oh, I could agree with that. I think the other scene that really just I thought was incredible. There's a sequence where a sniper
Mm-hmm.
is up in a nest and he's reciting a prayer.
Oh, he does that a couple times throughout the movie. Does that near the
Yeah, but it's
start. He
right
does.
towards the end when, like, as soon as he's done, this explosion hits him.
Mm-hmm. It's very poetic.
That to me was like, holy shit. And that
Or
was
when they
another
do it at the
thing.
beginning, where he's making the prayers, and it cuts to the soldiers on the beach also like making their prayers, and it cuts back to him finishing. Like
Oh, yeah. I
it.
mean, there's so much. And that was another thing. And I kind of touched on this in the beginning, is so much of this violence is so quick you barely have a moment to react to it. There's one sequence in the very beginning in the Normandy scene where the guy gets shot in the helmet. He takes the helmet off to look at it, and he's shot in the head, and
Yeah,
he
lucky
drops
bastard.
dead. And then by the next scene, it's like there's something else going on, and you could pause the film at any moment, and it's like a painting. There's so much going on at any given time, and it really shows the dedication and the commitment that went into this film.
I'd agree. What would you guys rate it out of 10?
Well, I'm just gonna come out and say it. I'm gonna give this a 10. I feel pretty confident in that.
Getting a lot of 10s out of you recently.
Well, I mean, this one I think deserves it.
Yeah.
I give this film, with all things considered, I give this film a solid 8. I think it's a great film. I think it's an absolute totem pole for great war films. I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but it's definitely one of the best. I think it stands very strongly for the American perspective of the war, and it's probably just the best and most nuanced example of it. Although I like to see a little bit outside of that with other films that have kind of opened my eyes to how things are. But I do think it's a solid film still, and it does emotionally impact me when I watch it, and it has influenced me when I was younger. So it's one of those films that I watch not every year, but whenever it comes on, I'll take a look at it.
Fair enough.
Definitely.
I'm struggling between a 9 and a 9.5. I'll give it a 9.5. I'm feeling generous. It's one of my favorite Spielberg movies. This is constantly fighting between Minority Report for my favorite Spielberg film. It deserves all the praise it gets, and outside of a couple of cheesy moments that really don't ruin the movie in the long run, it's still probably one of the most visceral and violent movies to ever come out of a Hollywood studio. It really doesn't feel like a Hollywood film at times, and that's very much a compliment.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Next up, we have one of my personal favorites, spoiler alert, The Thin Red Line, where my text isn't working properly. Hang on a second.
Yeah.
There we go.
I will say a couple of things, a couple of fun facts here.
Go on.
Both of these two films, The Thin Red Line and Saving Private Ryan, were both nominated for the Academy Award for Best Picture, and both of them lost to Shakespeare in Love.
Yeah.
So thanks, Weinstein.
Yes.
Wow.
God, that movie is...
1998 was a pretty stacked year. I mean, Saving Private Ryan, I think, came out first, and then Thin Red Line came out much later. Still, though.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah,
but I mean, the Oscars are always full of hacks. They gave Chicago Best Film over Lord of the Rings, I think Two Towers was out that year, so
they decided to award The Shape of Water over Three Billboards and Forrest Gump over Pulp Fiction. Don't get me started.
Yeah. I mean, I actually like Forrest Gump, but it is no Pulp Fiction.
Oh, another
time. We got a Terrence Malick film to talk about, who is a director. You know how you feel about Denis Villeneuve being pretentious, Steven? I feel the same way about Terrence Malick to the 10th degree. I find his style very obnoxious and doesn't really fit most of the narratives he's presenting. I think To the Wonder and The New World are some of the most egregious examples, and his style really does.
This is also more recent Terrence Malick I think talking about,
so
right?
But his earlier films too. I've seen Badlands and Days of Heaven, and I have the exact same problems with those movies. I'd argue those films were legitimately ruined by the style, like you mentioned with Sicario.
I do want to clarify something. I don't hate Denis Villeneuve. I think that I liked Enemy. I gave Polytechnique higher than you did, a higher score. So it's not that I hate him, it's just I think that he...
Well, that's why I said it's like that, but taken to the 10th degree.
Yeah, I mean, Arrival is kind of a little bit self-indulgent.
How you feel about Arrival is how I feel about most of Terrence's movies. However, this film, to me, has always been an exception. Dare I say, it's probably the only film I like from him, where a lot of his tropes are given narrative context. A lot of his tropes actually add emotion to the experience and to the characters, and fits the themes that he's discussing. His people talk like human beings, which is not too common in his films, in my personal opinion. So what's the Thin Red Line about? Well, the idiot that I am thought, I'll get this out of the way, I did not think this was a World War II movie at first, but in my defense, I'd argue that because I never really see the Thin Red Line as just a war movie. I always saw it as a film about human nature, and more so just like the dichotomy of man, and how the two different perspectives, naivety and pure passionate hatred, affect the world in different ways. And that's kind of represented by a couple of different relationships, because this film is huge and has tons of characters, tons of actors: Sean Penn, Nick Nolte, and a lot of actors that get smaller roles, including Adrian Brody and George Clooney, who was barely in the movie. I'm sorry if you went into this movie expecting like George Clooney to hop into I don't know how to pronounce it, Guadalcanal. Yeah, just hop into Guadalcanal with a machine gun and kick ass. That's not what this film is about at all. It's more so about
that was another thing I was gonna say in your defense, that Guadalcanal,
yeah,
that's actually in Japan, so it's kind of Asian.
Don't excuse me, man. There is no excuse for this. I will accept full responsibility. But
I don't think a lot of people hop into this film for action from the Cloonster. I don't know how much of a pull he has in this, but
I'm just saying, like, it has a star-studded cast, and a lot of the actors that are on the front cover are barely in the movie.
Expecting From Dusk Till Dawn, so
yeah, I know, man. I know it was written by Tarantino. Then no, but it is based on a autobiographical 1962 novel. In fact, a lot of the monologues I do believe are lifted straight from the novel as well. Not in the way that's obnoxious, cough the devil all the time, but in my opinion, although not to the opinion of others, in a way that just really adds so much emotional resonance to the story, and there's so much great visual storytelling. And like you said, Devin, it does explore, the ambiguous nature of both sides of the war a little bit better than Saving Private Ryan does, which is saying something.
And I think that's refreshing in like films that we see in an American culture, is having some internal and this happens throughout the film, is that you have characters and they all have these little tiny internal monologues that give you just a little bit of emotional insight to where their character is at. Like, you get a little bit of Nick Nolte feeling like he's been
excuse me,
what's the word I'm looking for, like he's
so
like so much has been taken, so much has been put upon him, and he feels like he's been undercut, and that's why he's acting the way he does in the film. And you get just these like little insights, which I think adds to this emotional I don't know, it gives you a broader arc of what all these characters are going through in this moment. Although I wouldn't say this is exactly a war film. It's more like a spiritual, philosophical film about war.
Agreed.
Is how I would put it. And I do like it for that reason. Many people would watch it and look at it as pretentious, but I think maybe they go in expecting a war film, which I don't blame them for. I mean, it is about World War II and things, but it takes a very different approach to that. And I do think it takes a more holistic view of nature and people's place in it. Although, one could argue if they place too much importance on nature. Like I made a joke earlier, comparing Malick's view of nature versus Werner Herzog. Werner Herzog, in this clip where he's in the jungle on his film set of Fisk, Colorado, and he says, there is a harmony in nature. It's the harmony of overwhelming
misery.
Misery and murder. Overwhelming and collective murder.
He
said that he loved nature against his better judgment, which is such,
and this film does ponder that. Like, what is life doing to itself? That it's constantly eating itself to survive. It kills itself, and then it fornicates. It kills itself, and I mean, I'm kind of blending the two together, but there is this film does ask that, and they kind of have these ponderous moments, which I really appreciated when I first watched it. I was kind of half asleep when I rewatched it, so maybe I didn't quite get as emotionally connected to it this time, or maybe my perspectives have changed. But I do like and appreciate this film a lot still. and I do like Terrence Malick still, though I haven't seen a lot of his more recent stuff beyond The Tree of Life, which I also really loved when I first saw it. Have any of you guys seen that?
Yes, and
I have not seen
not a
it.
fan of that one either.
That will either solidify or alter your perception of the guy. I think. For me, I really like Tree of Life. I really like Thin Red Line. I haven't seen, and I do like Badlands, and I did see Days of Heaven, so I do like those films. Although I have to be in the right mood for it. You know what I mean?
That's fair.
Yeah.
So,
If I'm feeling particularly nihilistic or misanthropic, it doesn't resonate with me. If I'm a little lovesick, then I really connect with them.
well, I'm just gonna be that guy. I didn't like this film at all.
At all?
Oh, I know.
At
Wow.
all? Okay.
No, I mean, I think that it's, got some great cinematography. I think that, there's some interesting shots. I mean, I would argue that the entire film is just, I mean, it's made up like a painting,
Yeah.
I mean, the cinematography. I mean, it's incredible, and all of the technical elements, the framing, the
Lighting.
The lighting. Yeah, of course.
I do want to point something out here, just very quick. The last film you complimented when it looks like a painting, and now you're saying like the painting is like the one good thing about this, maybe.
Well, yeah. I mean, yes, I think that the cinematography in both of these films is great. The difference for the Thin Red Line for me is that the characters are not as interesting. The story is not as interesting. I mean, to me, this kind of, I think it's funny that you bring up Vietnam, because I think if this movie was a Vietnam War film, I would have connected with it more. Whereas I think those sort of I think those questions and those sort of ponderings of like, what is life, and what are we doing here, and those sort of anxieties, I think that those things resonate more with Vietnam or any other war than they do with World War II, which is arguably, I mean, if you look at history and you look at the conditions that have to be met to justify our American government going to war, World War II is probably the only one in the last 100 years that meets all of those criteria. And so, I mean, it's like, I mean, Vietnam, yes, that was, I feel like that would have maybe made a better tonal connection. Whereas,
is that just because America won World War II, where you guys didn't really win anything in Vietnam?
Well, wait a minute.
It's a serious question.
Could you move your soapbox there, pal? Stepping on the children in Canada.
Oh, fuck off! I'm asking
Jesus
a legit question. I'm
Christ.
curious. Is it because you won that war, so you want to feel good about it, and you want to have
this movie,
identifiable
the other thing is,
feeling?
This movie is so pretentious. It's so full of itself.
I feel like this is the only film where that style fits.
About it. No. I want you to be very specific about what you find pretentious about this film.
I think that the monologues in this film and the constant voiceover narration, where I think that the dialogue is probably deeper. I don't think that it's as deep as it would like to be. There's so many sequences.
How deep do you think you would like it to be, or do you think that it is?
What I'm saying is, I mean, there's these sequences where they're like, first of all, every single character in this film, I don't know what universe Terrence Malick is from, but apparently everyone in his world that went to World War II is from West Virginia. They all have the similar, kind of the similar sound and the similar voice. And so they're all sort
That's not a big deal.
Well, they're all sort of posing these same questions where it's like,
a lot of people from San Ryan were like New Yorkers. A lot of them were like Brooklyners.
They're like, no. They're like, I saw the calmness in my mother's eyes. And they're doing this whole thing, and I'm just waiting for them to be
Here's my justification for that.
I was waiting for them to be like, I was driving Lincolns before Lincolns were cool.
Oh,
It's like,
fuck. I knew you were going to do
it's like, what are we
that.
doing? It's like this
Here's my
long
justification.
shots of whistling grass, and it's just like,
Those
oh,
are the
fuck
thoughts
off.
that here's my justification for that. Because the novel was inspired by actual writings of some of the soldiers, I think those are supposed to reflect, like, the writings of the soldiers. And that's why it works for me, because
Well,
it explores the
that
thoughts of the characters, and it's almost like every time
see,
we see a
that to
character,
me
we're
is
kind of reading their
incredible because
information.
I think so many of these characters are so bland.
I don't think so. Like, I think there's a lot of, like, hiding beneath the surface, and sure, they don't get a lot of development, but you get an idea of, like, their relationships and their
Well, and I
behavior
mean,
with the world and their
I will
viewpoints.
say this: I think that there is a great film somewhere in this. I think that it's also worth noting that this film went through various, development changes. There was, obviously Adrian Brody was basically cut out of the entire film.
He thought he was the main character straight
Yeah,
up. He was
and
very
he didn't
upset
even
when he wasn't.
find out. He didn't even find out until someone at the press junket asked him, like, "What part are you playing?"
Which unfortunately does happen a lot with movies. Like,
He's like,
actors are
good
not
question.
led into the editing process as
Well,
often
and
as
I
they
think
should.
this is something that is a recurring pattern with Malik. There's also, I mean, Billy Bob Thornton recorded a 3-hour narration to go with this film that never made the final cut. Mickey Rourke was cut out completely.
Even though I think he's
I think
credited.
that do I?
I think Mickey Rourke is credited too, and that's probably my only major issue with the movie is, like, there's a lot of characters. I understand the context. Like, we don't necessarily have time to get to know these characters for very long, and it's kind of like Saving Private Ryan in a sense where there's, like, a couple of main characters that draw the focus in, but there's a lot of characters that we get an idea of, their personality, but we don't know much beyond that because they're just soldiers of war to be tossed away. And I think that does have narrative context to it when it drives me nuts in other Terrence Malick movies.
I think it works in this film, but it also kind of works in Dunkirk, although this is a different discussion, where you know just enough about them and their immediate situation that they can become a vessel for you to kind of vicariously experience what they're experiencing. It's like a virtual reality kind of thing. It's like, and I remember playing this game when I was in school, and this was something that some organization set up. It was meant to be like a virtual experience of being in warfare. It was just a point and click thing, but you're supposed to type your own name in and then type the name of your best friend. And spoilers, in your game, your friend dies, and there's no way to undo that. So it's deliberately trying to get you to project yourself into this situation. And I think they kind of do it with movies where you learn about these characters, but only just enough to go by, but you're supposed to kind of immerse yourself into what they're doing. Although the film has to do a lot to get you into that state. And it did work for me the first time I watched it. I felt a little more disconnected this time watching it, although there's other reasons for that. This is something that really annoys me with streaming services. So I was watching this on Amazon Prime. Apparently, I was subscribed to Stars, which I don't remember subscribing to. It's one of those, like, I probably had to pay for it once just to watch one movie, and then I forgot to cancel the thing. So that's another microtransaction I should probably cancel. But what annoyed me the hell out of this is that I was watching it, and they cropped it. Like, it's an anamorphic widescreen film, but they scaled it in so that it filled up the entire screen. And I don't know why we're still doing that these days. Like, that just annoys the hell out of me when I'm not seeing the whole image of what I'm supposed to be watching. But it's a nitpick, but it's little things like that that can take you out of this film if you're not, when you're trying to get into the story and trying to get involved in the storytelling. And I do think the philosophical musings are valid, but it does make me wonder. Like, I don't think Terrence Malick was ever in a war, and so
I don't
this is
think
how
he was either. Yeah,
A lot of these directors aren't, though. In fairness,
and so this is what they would. I wonder if this is what they're wondering, if what the soldiers are wondering about when they're in the war. I mean, although he is taking from real, I guess, stories of what people have said. So I think there was some.
I think Spielberg. I think he had family in the Holocaust. I mean, I think he's writing from a more, or he's making a film from a more personal standpoint. Whereas I think Malick is kind of taking this sort of, philosophical sort of, profound approach to it as almost an outsider looking in.
But
And I
that
mean,
makes it interesting. Like, I don't think that
yeah,
takes
I
away
mean,
from the movie.
I don't want to give the impression that I just absolutely hated this film. It's just that there's something about it that just, I don't know. I mean, it just
No,
feels
you
a little.
absolutely hate the film. You just didn't like it at all. There is a difference
Well,
between
yeah,
those.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's well, I think that I mean, again, I think all of the technical elements here are incredible, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, credit where it's due. I think that the performances are good. I mean, Nick Nolte is really good here.
I thought both the lieutenants were great, and come back from the
You know,
adjuster playing the lieutenant in a good movie, and now I can actually act.
yeah, I mean, Nick Nolte is good here. He's a little bit cartoonish, a little bit, but he seems well earned in what he's doing.
Yeah, he's just very stressed
Elias
out.
Koteas
Mm-hmm.
is probably the best character in this. He's the one that I wanted to know about the most and really connected with the most.
Mm-hmm.
He's not in it very much, unfortunately, but um, yeah, I mean, there's elements here that are, I think, better shaped than others, but as a whole, I thought it was a little bit self-indulgent.
That's fair. A lot of people do think that way, and I remember Siskel and Ebert, I think at least Roger Ebert felt basically the same way you did. He's like, I appreciate the film, but I didn't really feel anything for it. I think it's the kind of movie where, the philosophical approach is really going to work for you or it really won't. And I don't know, for some reason it just works for me here. When these exact same tropes piss me off in Malik sort of work, but here it just, I don't know, it just fits the narrative and the structure so much more. And
It feels like there's a purpose behind it, and there's
exactly,
a viewpoint here that you can appreciate. Like I do
it
like it when
fits the
he's with
setting
the people on that island and he's seeing this, people just living together and living
and
kind of their
harmony.
best lives in contrast to what he's experienced in war.
Yeah,
And I do like that this film kind of balances those perspectives. Although I would say, since having seen this and having seen Come and See, I think Come and See makes that distinct even more, like even more of a high contrast, balancing the beauty of nature with the absolute horror of war.
that's
So it does make me kind of look back at this film and think, this is close. Like this is close to depicting that. But I'm going to keep talking about Come and See because I'm still
as close as you can get with a Hollywood movie where you aren't allowed to use real gunfire and shoot.
I'm still
cinematography.
recovering from watching that film a year later. Like it's that effective.
Oh, incredibly so, for sure. But yeah,
So
and the scene where the main character goes back and like none of the people recognize them and they're crying over people that they've lost, and there's burning, well, not burning buildings, but buildings in smoke. Like that was like one of the most heartbreaking scenes I've seen in a movie, where he's just so far removed from this society because of being thrusted into the war that he can't even go back. There's just no turning back to the lifestyle that he could have had if the military didn't find him.
I mean, I will say this. Jim Caviezel is really good here.
Yes, there's a great scene where he's talking with Sean Penn, and Sean Penn is giving this monologue about, it's like, why do you care about all of this all? All these people are just gonna die anyways. And he just looks at him. He just looks at him, and every emotion in his face, we can just tell exactly how he's feeling. And I really wish more Hollywood movies would have the balls to have like those kind of performances.
Well, and see, maybe maybe that's my criticism, is that I think there's so many characters here that they kind of get lost in the shuffle.
I think there's
so
enough
much
of a focus on like 3 or 4 central main characters that didn't really bug me too much.
I get that, but there's also John Travolta just like shows up, and then John
leaves.
Cusack shows up. Woody Harrelson shows up, and
but they make the most of their characters. Like
no, but I mean, like Woody Harrelson is in one scene, and his entire character is like, "I blew my butt off." It's like, I don't know.
So many people think that scene's laughable, but I thought it was effective.
I mean, it's kind of funny because it's Woody Harrelson.
It's Woody
for whatever
Harrelson,
reason.
I guess. Yeah,
but I don't know. I mean, I kind of wish that I don't know, man. I wish that I could have connected with this more. And I mean, I
That's
think
fair.
that I mean, I looked at comments. This film has actually been posted in several Facebook groups
Yeah.
recently, kind of coincidentally.
They
And
know.
reading,
And you'll post a comment like this film is divisive, and you'll get one like and one haha react. And the haha react is me.
yeah, no, but I mean, it's incredible because if you actually scroll through the comments, there's people who say this film is a masterpiece, and then there's like people who say that this film is, pretentious and it's like
It's
so
very
self-indulgent.
polarizing.
It is, yeah. And so I mean, I don't think that I don't know. I think that it's kind of par for the course with something like this. And I do want to go back and revisit Badlands and look out for some of his other filmography and maybe see if some of those films maybe connect better. I don't know. Maybe I would
I
enjoy
Very
highly
those
disappointed.
recommend Tree of Life. I'm curious to see what you think of that film.
Well,
Yeah, we need to
we
talk
should
about the
do an
Tree of Life
episode.
because I know you're big on that film, Devin, and I personally can't stand it. But I think it would make for a good discussion.
What
Oh,
would
I
you
think
even
so.
pair that with?
Well, hang on. Introspective films about childhood. We could do mid '90s and boyhood.
Oh, we're actually already doing mid-90s.
Aw, I forgot about
Youth
that.
in Bloom,
That's
suggested
right.
by.
And
Yeah,
replace one
well,
of those
Well-
films with Tree of Life.
yeah.
Some
Uh,
reason, I don't know why, when I thought Tree of Life, immediately I also thought of Enter the Void. Probably just as something completely opposite. You know what I mean?
Yeah, back to the
now,
film
now,
real quick
Enter
though.
the
Sorry.
Void. To me, Enter the Void is one of the best films of the last century. I loved
That
Enter
would
the
also
Void.
make for an interesting discussion. That's all
Very
I'm gonna say
much
on the
so.
matter.
I think
Yeah.
that would be a wild episode to tackle both of those films because they're both
Oh
huge,
yeah.
Very polarizing.
kind of very
Yeah.
polarizing movies.
No, I mean, man, and I mean, it is. I mean, Enter the Void. You could make some of the arguments that I'm making here about Enter the
Mhm.
Void. It's very pretentious. It's very sort of indulgent, but I think that
Oh, there's no 15-minute pointless sex scenes here, so I'll give it a plus
well,
for
yeah, I'm the turd Ferguson of movie critics.
that. Back to the movie real quick. Something we haven't talked about. Score by Hans Zimmer Chan is not only great,
Yes.
but it also laid the groundwork for time and shame. And he, unfortunately, as great of an artist as he is, kind of ripped off his other work because Journey to the Line or Journey to, I forget what the main theme of the movie is called, but I have the soundtrack on my phone. It's such a great piece of this rising tension that he would go on to use in his other scores, and the scene it's tied into in this movie is really effective. Like it's definitely one of my favorite scenes in the movie, besides the scene where Sean Penn is talking to John Caviezel in the field.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I did like gosh, the sequences where the woman is in the yellow dress and she's on a swing.
Yes.
I mean, again, I didn't really connect with that storyline. I wish that there was more sort of fleshed out there, but I will say that that is one of the most gorgeous sequences, and I don't mean that in like a male gaze, like she's an attractive woman. I just mean no. I mean that the sequence and the way that it's shot
it's
and
very
the angle.
dreamlike.
Yes, and it's incredible. It really is, and there's a lot of sequences like that. The opening scene with the alligator, and the scene at the end where Sean Penn is overlooking the ocean on the end of the boat, and we're watching the waves crash. I mean, I can't pretend that this is a gorgeously shot film.
I have something controversial to say.
Go ahead.
I think this should have won Best Cinematography over Saving Private Ryan. I love the cinematography in Saving Private Ryan, but I think this film should have won Best Cinematography
I'll show my
instead.
political bias idea. Well, I think it's beautiful in the traditional sense for what this film was capturing. Although Saving Private Ryan cinematography was really good for just pure immersion in a warlike
It was
thing.
good for
So,
different reasons.
yeah, they're both good. I think Thin Red Line is beautiful in a traditional sense, where Saving Private Ryan was really trying to immerse you in the film with what it
Well, I
accomplished.
think
What won
that
best score
I think it
that
has. I
year?
think it has a slight edge for that reason. I think that's one of the few occasions I agree with the Academy there, but
yeah,
very
definitely.
slight edge because I love the cinematography in both of
Oh,
these.
also, I'd like to point out, Life is Beautiful won Best Original Score that year over Saving Private Ryan and The Thin
Oh
Red
my God.
Line.
Wow, that is.
Remember Norm Macdonald's take on that movie?
Oh, that was
Yes.
hysterical. Yeah.
How does Norm Macdonald keep coming back on our podcast? He just keeps haunting us from our grave.
I mean, there's something very Norm-like that he keeps trolling us even after death.
Yes. We honor your memory, sir. Rest in peace.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I mean, this isn't a bad film. I can see that
No, that's
somewhere.
I get it. It's like you appreciate it, but you just didn't resonate with it.
Yeah,
That's
I
fine.
think I respect it from a distance. And I
That's
mean,
fair.
it's also worth noting that um, the late, great Christopher Plummer, I have to read what his statement on Terrence Malick was. So, Christopher Plummer told a group, which included Viola Davis, Charlize Theron, Tilda Swinton, and George Clooney, quote, Terrence insists on writing and overwriting and overwriting until it sounds terribly pretentious. You have to work terribly hard to make it sound real. And then he edits his films in such a way where he cuts everybody out of the story. He said he gets very terribly involved in poetic shots, which are gorgeous, all of them, but he gets lost in that and the stories get diffused. His basic final quote was that I had to write him a letter. I told him to get a writer. You are so boring. I'm never working with you again.
I will say this: Terrence Malick is apparently very difficult to work with, and he infamously hates getting any screen coverage on him whatsoever. That shot you can see on his IMDb page, that is the only behind-the-scenes shot you see from him. He'll go out of his way to pay people not to give any behind-the-scenes footages that include him in any interviews or any photos whatsoever. Like, he just...
I mean, he's a very reclusive person. He really keeps to himself. He doesn't do interviews. And there is something I admire about that. Just someone who just really tries to stay in his own world, which is good and bad. But I do think it does show maybe a purity to vision for what it's worth. I don't know.
That's true.
He really doesn't.
It's kind of like David Lynch talked about, where it's like, why do you want to interview me and ask about the film? Like, the film is explaining itself.
Or Kubrick does the same thing, where it's like, just explain the basic plot synopsis of 2001, and he's like, what's the film about? I just told you. I just told you what the film's about. Go away.
I think that's respectable, because it challenges people to make up their own mind about these things, and I do think
I do agree with.
I think interviewers and people love inside scoops on what is inside these people's heads when they're making these, because people are interested. But their whole point is to find your own way and craft a film in your own vision, and make it for yourself, kind of thing. And Denny, I think, did that with Dune, making his own version of Dune. And there's a plus to that, and then there's a negative to that. But I do think ultimately the fact that they don't want to give easy answers to these things and challenge you to view the film and make your own conclusions of it is a good thing. So I respect directors that do that.
That I do agree
definitely.
With. What would you give? Speaking of interpretation, what would you guys give it out of 10?
Oh, Devin, why don't you start?
Ooh boy. I think I'd give this a solid 7.5. I mean, it's not my favorite film, but I do like it still, and I do like these questions that they ponder. I do think it's a very beautiful film, although I didn't quite resonate with it as emotionally as I did. In the past, I would have given it a much higher score, but I do still appreciate it for what it is.
Steven?
Definitely. I'm gonna go similar to Devin here. I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10.
Oh, that's more generous than I was
I mean,
expecting.
again, it's not terrible. It's just I don't know. It wasn't quite for me.
Mhm.
Well, I love you guys, but you're both
You don't
wrong.
want to bump that. You don't want to. You don't want to bump that 0.9.
I'll give it a nice, nice
I'll
6.9.
keep it at
Sure.
a 6. Let's be
Uh,
honest here. I love
okay.
you guys, but you're both wrong. No, it's everything you said is something that applies to his other films, but here I can't even explain it. There's something about this film that just feels so magical and resonating to me, and it really captures the brutal reality of both sides of the war in a very poetic and interesting way. And I don't know. I attached to the themes of the characters. I even attached to monologues. I hate the trope of the Dear John letters so much, but this film somehow absolutely nails that trope. It's one of the most gorgeous films ever made. Has one of the best soundtracks. It's one of my favorite movies, and I totally get the arguments that's pretentious and that there isn't much there, but you know, I'd prefer films that are okay, great for some people, instead of a film that's just okay for everybody. And this film is very special for me, and that's why I'm giving it a 9.5 out of 10. This is basically the greener grass discussion all over again.
Yeah,
Nice.
basically. Wow.
Well, Ian, I do want to say, well, I think there's something to be said that not everything needs to be said or explained. If people feel they connect to something, that's as far as they need to really say that they've connected with it. That it just works for them. And I want to say I think we watched this together, when we were at school,
That's right.
and
Yeah.
and I cherish that. I cherish that we got to share this, and that was, I think, one of the first films that we watched, and that's when our discussions about filmmaking really started, and that's where I really remember connecting with this film, and I cherish that a lot.
I cherish that too, man. But
Yeah.
going from something really
Well,
poetic to the complete opposite.
yes.
Puppet Master Littlest Reich.
Well, I will introduce this film. I did want to talk about one thing very briefly.
Mhm.
So, both of the films that we just talked about, kind of some fun trivia here, have some very troubling real world implications.
Oh
Uh,
boy.
yeah, so this is kind of
Okay.
fun. Both of the actors, the lead actors, or, at least two lead actors from both of these films, have some troubling, problematic appearances in the news. So, to start with, the Thin Red Line, Jim Caviezel, appeared at the QAnon conference in Las Vegas. Apparently, they have a QAnon convention for the conspiracy theory that Donald Trump is a godlike being and will rid the world of demonic creatures that are the Democratic. I don't know. Anyway,
Incredible.
Yes.
yeah. He was speaking at the For God and Country Patriot Doubletown, where he claimed that there is an ongoing religious war between the devil himself and liberal values, even going so far as to repeat Mel Gibson's famous battle cry from Braveheart. Yeah. So the years have not been kind
Now,
to Jim
But now what
Caviezel.
happened to the other actors, Stephen?
didn't
Yes.
Jim also? Wasn't Jim also Jesus in his Passion of the Christ?
Yes.
He was, yes.
And
He's very passionate.
he's kind of avoided other movie roles for his devout religious beliefs.
Apparently, yes,
That's true.
I'm gathering that. Now,
Yeah.
for Saving Private Ryan, if you go to IMDb right now, you will notice that Tom Sizemore is in a lot of independent film productions. He has essentially gone the same career path as Eric Roberts.
And
He's
Nicolas
in
Cage.
every small, low-budget film imaginable, which is a very far cry from Saving Private Ryan, True Romance, Heat,
Oh,
Born on
Heat.
the
Oh,
4th
man.
of July. And you wonder to yourself, what happened? Well, Tom Sizemore was removed from a movie set for allegedly groping and violating an 11-year-old child.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, so the story is murky at best. It's been debated as to what really happened. The court case was actually dismissed recently, but some people wonder if that was because of his innocence or if that was actually because of the statute of limitations. So it's very unfortunate that fame has led these actors down some really dark paths. And it's also worth noting that Steven Spielberg actually believed in Tom Sizemore so much that he threatened to reshoot the entire film without him if he didn't get clean and sober.
To the point where he drug tested them every single day personally. Like, every single day he just showed up to his tent for a cup on the ground. He's like, get busy.
Yeah, so...
Jesus Christ.
Some unfortunate turns of events.
Speaking of unfortunate turns of events.
Speaking of completely tasteless news.
Spoilers for Puppet Master.
Puppet Master: The Littlest Reich is a 2018 horror comedy film directed by Sonny Laguna and Tommy Wickland. This film is written by S. Craig Zahler. Obviously, we've talked about him before with Bone Tomahawk, Brawl in Cell Block 99, and Dragged Across Concrete. It is the 12th entry in the extremely convoluted Puppet Master franchise. It serves as a bit of a reboot or, fresh start to the property. This film stars some B-movie icons such as Udo Kier and Barbara Crampton. This film also stars some up-and-coming comedians and actors such as Jenny Pellicer, Thomas Lennon, also my friend Skeeta Jenkins, who plays Cuddly Bear.
Wow.
So that's why you like the movie so much.
I do, yeah. The music is done by Fabio Frizzi, who was a frequent collaborator of Lucio Fulci. So, the entire score for films such as The Beyond, Zombie 2, City of the Living Dead, etc. What's this film about? Well, in Texas, Dallas, Texas, a comic book employee and his slacker friend travel to a hotel where they are putting on a convention for fans of a Nazi puppeteer. It's sort of a macabre and a bizarre sort of like comic book convention of sorts, but dedicated to this war criminal who is a very infamous, shady guy who was a puppet master during Nazi Germany and would perform with these puppets, but the puppets are also cursed. And what happens?
Ooh.
Well, all of the various people at the hotel, their puppets start coming to life, and they commit hate crimes. So, yeah,
incredible.
It's a very tasteless, offensive little horror comedy, and I loved it. Let's talk about it.
Well,
nice.
This movie reminds me a lot of Repo the Genetic Opera in the sense where it's like, it's no masterpiece. A lot of it's objectively terrible, but it has heart, and I enjoyed it. It's not great by any means, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was a kind of a funny indictment of neo-Nazi culture, and how after all of these years, there's still a group of people that obsess over it. It's maybe not particularly subtle, but apparently in this, for some people, that think it's just racist towards Germans, which it's offensive in a lot of ways, but I don't really agree with that angle on it. But it's I don't know. It's kind of terrible, but I enjoyed it more than I thought I would.
It's kind of hard to be mad at it.
Exactly. It's like the heart's there,
Yeah.
I guess I'm a tryhard because I really didn't like this movie, like at all.
What?
Well,
this is gonna be good.
Steven. So I know you had trouble watching all of the Thin Red Line in one sitting. It took me 3 times to watch all this without falling asleep.
Falling asleep.
Yeah, no, and I don't like to shit on indie movies because I support the indie scene and whatnot. I just could not vibe with this thing. Although there is a lot to appreciate in it. It is schlock. I wasn't expecting much, but it somehow even seem to go below those expectations.
Wow.
e- Even
So
though this is, I know this is like the tail end reboot of a franchise that's very convoluted in and of itself. And if this is like the better of the Puppet Master films, I'm not too keen on seeing any of the other ones.
Well, so let me ask this: what in particular did you not enjoy? Was it perhaps the sort of problematic nature of it? You know, that these puppets are
It's not that. It's just I was bored.
really.
That's fair.
Well, I mean, I guess I could see that. I will say, if I had to nitpick something, the deaths don't have a lot lot of weight
I
to the
disagree
narrative.
because the
Well,
decapitation was amazing.
that's the one thing I liked about
Yeah.
that's the one thing I liked about the film. When I saw people dying and they used some pretty gnarly practical effects, I'm like, okay, this is getting interesting.
No, no, no. What
Um,
I'm saying is, I mean, the characters that die, they're not characters that you are attached
There were
to.
slasher
And-
movie characters where it's like, okay,
Right,
these are the
right.
red shirts that
But-
are gonna die now.
But I will say, I thought the deaths were incredible.
They're hilarious.
There's one
it's
particularly.
I do love the use of practical effects for those. Like I had fun with that.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
puppets too were like they kind of look like shit, but it's like, aw, it's cute. They tried, like, and some of the puppet designs
Well,
are
I
like kind of
mean,
entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, there's
I could
one
use
kill.
like a Funko Pop figure of some of these puppets.
Well, I also thought it was funny. Like, there's one kill in particular, and I mean, we could talk about the kills all day, but there's one hysterical kill where this one puppet flies around on a propeller,
Yes.
and the guy goes to take a piss in the hotel bathroom. It cuts his head off, and then we have like a point of view shot of his head falling in the toilet, but his dick is peeing on his head.
Okay, that
Oh,
yeah,
I know.
that was a bit much, but
It
was
was
a bit much.
kind
Well,
of hilarious.
There
though.
was that, and also the puppet and the pregnant woman. I mean, that was
Oh
that
my
was
God,
like
yeah.
I watched that and I'm like, why? What?
Because
I-
it's edgy and
yeah, that was kind of
I
dumb.
mean, it's
I'll give it an A for creativity, but really, it was just that just seemed
Oh,
unnecessary to
it
me.
reminded me of the Alien vs Predator Requiem scene where they
That's
had
exactly
like
what I
an
was thinking
alien
of.
killing pregnant woman for no reason. It's like we don't know who
Yeah.
these characters are. We don't know like
Yeah.
why we should care about them. They're just doing this to be edgy. But here,
And
like
you know,
it's at
I-
least a little more goofy and tongue in cheek, so it fits like a little bit more. Whereas that movie just took itself so seriously.
Well,
Like,
and I think
I can tell they had fun making this. I just wasn't
Yeah.
having fun watching it.
Understandable.
well, and I will say this. I think that the film, God, I completely get how someone would not resonate with this. It's a little bit on the cheap side of independent film. I think they made this for like 2.5 million.
I've seen
if I
cheaper
were-
films that look way better than this, though. Like that was my main
Well,
problem. Is that it's like if you did
Well, it's
interesting
like the
things,
lighting was super uninspired.
I
Like I
can't
could tell they just set up a light panel
Yeah.
on the other end of the room. You could see it in
Sure.
Merkowitz's glasses. I mean,
Steven, I can't stress enough, and no offense, how student film this movie is in its presentation.
I mean,
I
could-
made this film before,
had
and
so
I am
many
not proud of
student
it.
film flashbacks. Although here's the thing: if this was a student film and I was watching it, I would probably have enjoyed it a lot more. If
Well,
I had that
yeah.
kind of
okay, and
expectation
I
going
will
into it.
say this, and I mean, I think some of those criticisms are fair, but I think the script is actually a little bit better than the presentation. I think that
True.
the script has moments of genuine, like, this is hilarious. Like,
Yeah,
I think that the
I'd agree
script
with
has
that.
some great beats. There's definitely that lyricism and that kind of musicality that Zaylor has with his dialogue.
That I don't agree with,
Mhm.
but it
It's
is
a
entertainment
very,
part.
well, it's
Yes.
a very specific sense of humor that he's carrying over from like Brawl
Oh,
in
yeah.
Cell Block 99, and
That-
it's almost like Tarantino or like a Diablo Cody, where it's like you can see his mouth on the characters, you know. And I appreciate that. I think that here's what I think. I think Zaylor was probably called in, and they were like, "We have the rights to Puppet Master because Cinestate, the company behind Brawl and Dragged Across Concrete and some of these other films, at one point owned the studio Fangoria. So what I think happened here was somebody came to Zaylor and was like, "We have Puppet Master, like just make something," and it was kind of like a paycheck thing. But I think that what you have is he's legitimately a good writer and director, so he's trying a little bit more than maybe is deserved of something like this. I mean, again, this is a 12
I didn't think he was trying that hard. In all honesty, like this is his worst script, and it felt like a throwaway.
I think,
but a lot of that could be credited to the direction. It does show how much the direction has influence in it. But
sure. I mean, I admire his sense of humor, and I admire his.
Yeah.
I mean, there's moments here where you can feel those little dialogue beats that he does.
It sounds like everybody is him. It sounds like it's his voice in everything.
That's how I feel about
and this
all
is
those
and this
movies,
is what I was
though.
saying about Diablo Cody when she wrote Juno. Everybody talks like the same person. Which
well, I mean, there are characters that are a little bit different. I mean, you can't tell me that Markowitz sounds anything like Cuddly Bear. Like, I mean, they have some defining characteristics.
I credit that more to the actors than the writing, though, and it's funny you mentioned that, Devin, because that's this exact same problem I have with all of S. Craig Zoller's movies. Is that all of his characters
sound like they're talking just like slight variations of him. It's like him doing a different voice, basically.
Exactly.
Like there's certain words that he uses, and they're words that I would use too, like insinuation, but they just don't sound like it would come out of this person's mouth. Like in a real world like dialogue situation, this isn't how a person like that would talk, I think.
Well, and
that's the real trick of things, right?
We had this same discussion with like Dragged Across Concrete, where he uses the word rectum, or he uses, it's like these little word whiskers that you can clearly tell, like, oh, that's him.
It's a Zaylerism.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. And I mean, you could make that same argument against Quentin Tarantino, right? You could make that. I mean, it's
Tarantino's films are more self-aware. I'd say Puppet Master kind of is self-aware, and that's why I personally enjoyed it more than something like Dragged Across Concrete.
I think that it's.
But
I think that it does, by the end of it, kind of cross over into sort of like a meta commentary, like, what the fuck am I doing with this?
Yeah, a little bit. And like I said, it is like very clearly an indictment of neo-Nazi culture and how much they just hate minorities for no reason, and that aspect of it I kind of enjoyed. It's like there's a little more meat on its bones.
Sure. I think that the one thing that and this goes into the direction of the film, not so much the script, but there's one sequence in particular that really bugged the shit out of me. If I had to nitpick. So towards the end, the Nazi that is mind controlling these puppets from beyond the grave.
That's scary.
Yeah, the main character is going to get in a truck and slam into the Nazi grave and all this. And so they do. And then, she grabs a gun. The girlfriend grabs a gun. They get out of the truck. This zombie Nazi pops out of the grave, and it attacks her. She falls to the ground, and he rushes to her aid. And then the zombie thing, like, walks off, and you don't really get a sense of, like, good direction. It's like, why is he just letting this thing walk off?
Again, that's why it feels like a student film. It's just all of these mistakes.
Sure.
And the fact that S. Craig Zoller, of all people, wrote it and wasn't like, guys, that's not how that works. Like,
I think
people don't
act
that way.
It was supposed to be more quick. I think that it was supposed to be he reaches for the gun before they
messed it up in the editing process or something.
Well,
it just
if anything, it shows how much direction and editing influence the end product, right?
Exactly.
Sure. And that, to me, I mean, it's like, I think that was supposed to be like before they can even react. It's because in the final product, it's almost like he's just letting him go and have the time to get this gun and shoot the girl, and it just came off a little bit wonky. So
Yeah.
I definitely.
I mean, something
I
else
mean,
that's very wonky is the acting. Oh boy,
well,
and it's
who
Muppets
in
from Space
particular?
levels. Almost everyone, like outside of the Nazi woman, I thought every actor was either underperformed or just terrible. Like just
I think the main
awful.
character was supposed to be like
That actor
it-
is casted that same fucking character in every movie, and it pisses me off. I had that in my notes.
it's like yeah, I
He's
get
just a
his dad is an
loser.
asshole
Yeah.
and he's going through some things, but he just looks bored most of the time.
Yeah, so many of the actors look bored. Like, they aren't even trying, and that makes it funnier at certain parts, but in other parts, it's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, let's show a little passion here, show a little smile.
The one that I
please.
think worked for me was Merkowitz, and he's supposed to be the annoying comic relief character. He's like the one that actually acts and talks like a person that I would know.
And here's the thing,
I
though.
actually,
Yeah, go on.
he was the cause of the one joke that made me laugh in this whole thing, and I feel like ashamed that this was the joke that was it. Well, first of all, this whole trilogy was a bit of a remiss for me because I wanted to do the Thin trilogy with the Thin Red Line, the Thin Blue Line, and the Thin Pink Line.
Oh,
But
next time.
and then a movie like this I think would have paired perfectly with like Toy Soldiers or something, or Small Soldiers.
Yeah, sure.
But anyway, the one joke that made me laugh in the whole thing, where I kind of laughed in defeat, was when he pulls Junior Fuhrer out of the back of the one guy he was controlling and throws him in the oven and says, "See how you like it." And
Yeah.
it was one of those like eye rolls, but then I just couldn't help but laugh at it. Like, God
Well,
fucking
it's
damn it.
Yeah, it's so. It's so deliberate. I mean, it knows exactly what it is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
I'm
was
like,
very
okay, fine, movie. You won me with that. I
And
can
that's
have
where
fun now.
I think that's where the script is not as good as the direction, and that's because that moment is genuinely funny, and I think
Wait,
that
don't
if
you mean
had,
the direction isn't as good as the script?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Got it.
Mhm.
No, and I mean, I do think some of the actors' performances are better than
The
others. I
actress
would agree.
was so bad. Like, that's a perfect
Really?
example.
Okay.
I thought she
Jenny,
was terrible. Like, that's
I
the
thought
whole
she
time
was
I'm
one of.
thinking you're there for your looks, and all I could think of was the Family Guy moment where it's like, why do you only here
Well,
because she's helping the director?
what was it? Was it her acting or was it her direction?
Both.
I
Whatever
actually
led to
think
that.
I actually think she was one of the better performances.
I disagree.
I agree that the guy who plays Edgar, I thought he was.
He just plays a annoying, awkward
Yeah.
loser that he plays in every single movie.
But to
and it's
me,
really annoying.
it's like Jenny and Jenny Palliser, who plays the love interest, Merkowitz, and also Cuddly Bear.
What the crazy Nazi woman is? What's her name again?
So who are you talking about? The police officer?
Yes.
Okay, Barbara Crampton.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was the best character. She was like,
Oh,
okay,
she's-
your
yeah.
your character is terrible, but you know it is, and you're giving 110%. And I kind of wish the other actors got the memo, and I kind of feel like they did.
Yeah, and I mean,
Personally.
I don't know. I mean,
But
there's
it made
Udo
it more
Kerr was
funny.
in more of the
Yeah.
movie because he was genuinely good, being
Who's that?
an evil the Nazi in the beginning of the movie.
I don't know.
Ah,
I thought it
yes,
was better
Udo
in Trading Across
Kier.
Concrete.
Udo Kier, he was in Cell Block 99, and he had a very memorable performance in that
Yeah,
film.
he was great in that.
Definitely. No, I
Mhm.
mean, look, I mean, I think all of the criticisms against this film are incredibly valid, and I could definitely understand.
But I mean, I had fun watching it, which is more than what I could say about Society that we talked about last week, where I was like Devin, I was just so
Oh.
bored and uninvested. But here it's like,
Me,
yeah, it's
me,
bad, but I'm having fun
I had a
with it.
lot more fun with Society, probably just because I was in the mood for it.
Well, it maybe I don't know. Maybe it's kind of like what Devin said. Maybe it was a mistake to put this film right after, two of arguably the best war films ever made.
Yeah,
I don't
American
know.
Hollywood. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. But kind of like Ian said, I had fun with it. I mean, there's this great sequence at the bar where Merkowitz is trying to haggle for the price of a laxative to put in the
Oh
drink,
yeah.
and it's like, cuddly bear. I don't know, man. It's fun. It was a fun movie. I think it's very dumb. I think it is very self-aware of how dumb it is, and I think it definitely could have benefited from a little bit tighter direction.
Yeah,
But
and less bland cinematography because, like, it's a low budget, but I've seen movies with much lower budgets than this that look 10 times better. The Ring
well,
Redemption was shot on $100,000, for example.
I mean, it's kind of funny that the cinematography here doesn't seem as good as the cinematography in Run, Hide, Fight.
I'd say they're both about as bland, honestly.
I think Run, Hide, Fight was just slightly better because there seemed like there was more. I don't know. There was more sense of direction.
That's a good question, Devin. What film do you think is worse, Run, Hide, Fight, or Puppet Master: The Littlest Reich? Go.
I mean, this film is less egregious in its messaging. It is meant to be just pulpy, kind of fun. Oh, look, these Nazi puppets. I just didn't find it as interesting. Where Run, Hide, Fight, I found it entertaining but egregiously in its message, but where I just vehemently, passionately despised it.
But
this
that
film
wasn't
bore
emotion.
me to tears. Yeah. So it's two very different levels of disappointment, but they're both there.
Okay.
What would you guys give it out of 10?
I don't know. I thought it was great. Give it an 8 out of 10. There you go.
Are you just saying that because your friend was in the movie?
Hey, I want to clarify. These opinions are my own. This shouldn't impede upon Steven's ability to get a job working at your fine company. He would be a great asset.
Yeah, it's all in good
to
taste,
making
man.
your films watchable.
Yeah,
I hire Steven Beeson. He will inject some good quality content into your films.
You can find him on Facebook, Discord, Instagram,
right? Sure.
Snapchat, and
thank you.
That said, fuck this movie. 3.4.
I give it a 5 out of 10, but I give it with love. It's terrible in a lot of ways, but I had fun with it, and it's kind of got like a bit of a parody-esque edge to it. It kind of reminded me of South Park and
definitely
Team America at times, even though it's nowhere near as airtight or as funny as those movies. It kind of has its spirit. So, 5 out of 10. I had fun watching it. That's more than what I could say about Society. So
I guess I just felt left out because the spirit didn't possess me. And I kind of wanted to be, this is my pitch for a Puppet Master movie. I wouldn't make it literal. I just hate puppets. It's a little on one hand they're a little unnerving, but they're at the same time unthreatening to me. So they don't really make for a good stare, and I don't find them that appealing. Oh. I would have Puppet Master be a plot closer to Possessor. So my hot take is Possessor is the best Puppet Master movie.
Oh, mine
too.
Well,
okay, but wait a minute. They kind of touched upon that where the puppet crawls inside that one guy's body.
Again, that's the one part where this is getting interesting and a little scary. I wish that there was more of that. I wish that was what it was. Is that it wasn't literal fucking Nazi puppets. I wish they were controlling people to kill people incognito, and that would have made for a more compelling, interesting narrative that kind of freaks me out.
Maybe wouldn't fit the tone though as a horror comedy, but as a straight up horror, Possessor is one of the freakiest out there in recent memory.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what can you say about this? I mean, when you say that the movie is about Nazi puppets that come to life,
it could be a lot worse, for sure. Maybe that's why I liked it so much. Maybe I wouldn't like it so much on a second watch. My expectations were just so low, but
I think maybe if you got drunk and just
throw it on at a party, but I'm saving Tammy the T-Rex for that. So
I was not well rested, and I was too sober to appreciate it.
There you go. So thank you all so much for listening to our first episode on the war. Next episode will also focus on the war for my selection, and I decided to choose films from other perspectives once again. Devin, I feel bad that we couldn't talk about Ivan's childhood, so I'm replacing When the Wind Shakes the Burley with that movie. And we will also be talking about The English Patient and The Messenger, because, messengers during wartime is a very thankless job, and I'd really like to explore a movie that sheds a new light on that horrible job. So
Did you do a movie I really want to see? I want to see. Oh wait, I guess we did have. What wasn't there some movie about homing pigeons?
The Disney film?
Yeah, I guess
Valiant?
so.
No.
You know, it's like
yeah.
Valiant. That was it. It's like I say these things like I wish there was a film about the homing pigeons in war, but then I remember there's an animated film and how terrible it was.
Yeah, let's
Like, oh.
not
Yeah.
remember that. The messenger.
I kind of want a realistic photoreal remake of Valiant where it's very self-serious about homing pigeons.
I keep suggesting
a Disney live-action remake.
Yeah, I keep suggesting Cross of Iron by Sam Peckinpah, which is one of the most brutal war movies ever made, and it's actually from the German perspective. And I think I thought that would be an incredible film, to talk about at some point.
At some point. Maybe next year. We have tons of ideas for episodes, guys. You're not stopping us anytime soon. And thank you so much, Lisa, for listening in. I know you guys were tuning in while playing some Magic the Gathering, so I hope that was a great experience for you. And to those watching at home.
Thank you, all of you, for listening at home on YouTube and Spotify whenever Ian uploads.
Mm-hmm.
all 10 of you listening right now.
Yes.
We appreciate and love every single one of you.
All 10 of our biggest fans.
Yes, you are all wonderful, lovely people. And in honor of Veterans Day and Remembrance Day, thank you all so much for listening in. And is it Tuesday yet? Have a great night, guys.
Good night, everybody. And
stay tuned for Conan.
O'Brien.
Yeah.